In 2020, the United States printed roughly 80% of all dollars that existed in history. Let that land for a second. Every dollar ever made since 1776, over 2.5 centuries of economic output, 2 world wars, the moon landing, the dot-com boom, the 2008 crash, and then in a single year, they printed almost that same amount again. And for a while, almost nothing happened. No hyperinflation, no currency collapse, prices barely moved. Economists who had been warning about the consequences went quiet. It seemed like the money printers had finally found a cheat code. Then 2021 arrived. Then 2022. And suddenly eggs cost $4. Rent jumped 30% in some cities overnight. And a used Honda Civic was selling for more than its original sticker price. Brand new. So what actually happened? Why did the first wave of printing do almost nothing? And then the second wave feel like someone lit the economy on fire? The answer involves a concept that almost nobody talks about in plain language. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Let's start with the thing everyone gets wrong. Most people think money printing works like this. More dollars in circulation means each dollar is worth less, which means prices go up. Simple. Logical. Almost completely wrong, or at least dangerously incomplete. Because here's the part that model leaves out. It doesn't matter how many dollars exist. It matters how many dollars are moving. Economists have a word for this: velocity. The velocity of money. It sounds technical, but the idea is almost embarrassingly simple. If you have $100 and you spend it today, and the person you paid spends it tomorrow, and the person they paid spends it the day after, that single $100 bill is doing the work of $300 worth of economic activity. Now, imagine instead that you get those $100 and you just keep them in a savings account, under your mattress, in a corporate treasury. That money exists, but it isn't doing anything. It has no velocity. It might as well not exist. This is the mechanism that most inflation explainers skip, and it changes everything. Now go back to 2008. The financial crisis hits. The Federal Reserve panics. They start creating money, trillions of dollars, and pumping it into the banking system through a program called quantitative easing. It sounds like a spa treatment. It is not. The idea is simple. Give banks money. Banks lend money. People spend money. Economy recovers. But here's what actually happened. The banks took the money, looked at the wreckage of the economy around them, and did not lend it out. They held it. They deposited it right back at the Federal Reserve, earning a small amount of interest to do essentially nothing. The money existed. It just didn't move. And so the inflation that everyone predicted, that some economists were almost gleefully anticipating, never came. Velocity had collapsed. The new money sat in the financial system like water pooled behind a dam. Enormous pressure. Nowhere to go. This went on for years. The Fed printed, the money piled up, prices stayed quiet. Some people called this proof that inflation was dead, that the old rules no longer applied, that modern economies had evolved past the constraints of monetary theory. They were wrong. They were just early.
Fast forward to 2020. A pandemic shuts down the global economy in weeks. This time, the government doesn't just give money to banks. They mail checks directly to people. They top up unemployment benefits to levels higher than many people's actual wages. They fund the Paycheck Protection Program, which handed hundreds of billions to small businesses, with, in many cases, no strings attached. For the first time in a long time, the money went directly into the hands of people who were going to spend it. But here's the twist, and this is the part the narrative usually glosses over. In 2020, people actually couldn't spend it. Restaurants were closed. Travel was shut down. Movie theaters, concerts, theme parks, gyms, the entire service economy, which is where most consumer spending actually goes, was locked. So people saved. The personal savings rate in the US hit 33% in April 2020. To put that in context, the historical average is somewhere around 7%. People were saving at nearly 5 times the normal rate. Not because they wanted to, but because there was nowhere to spend. The dam was getting bigger. The pressure was building. And then, the economy reopened.
What happened next was not really complicated. It just happened all at once, in every sector, with no warning. Consumers had 2 years of suppressed spending, combined with unprecedented cash injections. They rushed back into the economy simultaneously. They wanted to travel. They wanted to eat out. They wanted to renovate their homes. And while they were stuck inside, they'd already bought every couch, every laptop, every exercise bike that existed. Supply chains, which had been reorganized for a locked-down world, could not pivot fast enough. There weren't enough microchips to build new cars. There weren't enough shipping containers in the right ports. There weren't enough truck drivers. Demand exploded. Supply couldn't move. And all that money that had been sitting still for 2 years suddenly started moving very, very fast. Velocity came back. In 2021, the velocity of money was still historically low, but it was rising sharply. And rising velocity, combined with that enormous base of new money, was exactly the formula that monetary theory had always predicted would cause inflation. It just took 2 years and a global pandemic to pull the trigger. Now, here's the part where it gets uncomfortable. The Federal Reserve, which controls U.S. monetary policy, has a mandate to maintain stable prices and maximum employment. In 2021, when inflation first started ticking upward, the Fed called it transitory, a word that, in retrospect, aged about as well as MySpace. They were looking at the wrong variables. They were watching the money supply, which had always been a lagging indicator. They weren't watching velocity closely enough. They weren't modeling a scenario in which 2 years of suppressed consumer demand gets released simultaneously into a supply-constrained economy. Or maybe they were watching, and they made a political calculation. Keep rates low, let the economy run hot, support employment. A bet that the inflation would resolve itself before it became entrenched. It didn't. By 2022, the Fed was raising interest rates at the fastest pace in 40 years. Mortgage rates doubled in under 12 months. The goal was to slow the economy, reduce demand, slow the velocity of money back down. Which works, but it also hurts. And it hurts some people a lot more than others.
So, zoom out. What does this actually mean? It means inflation is not a simple cause and effect story. It's not print money, get inflation. It's print money, plus that money gets spent by enough people fast enough against a backdrop where supply cannot keep up. And then you get inflation. Each of those conditions has to be true. And those conditions are never all simultaneously obvious in real time, which is why central banks keep getting caught off guard. It also means that the power to cause inflation is increasingly distributed. Governments don't just print money into a vacuum. They print it into a social and logistical context that they only partially control. A pandemic, a war, a drought, a shipping bottleneck on the other side of the world can be the match that lights the fuel. And the fuel has been accumulating in modern economies for a long time.
Decades of quantitative easing across the US, Europe, and Japan created a financial system with extraordinary amounts of money sitting at low velocity. Most of it hasn't moved. Yet.
Which brings us to the question that no one has a clean answer to. We are now in a world where central banks have used emergency monetary tools so many times that emergency is starting to feel like the default. Where the line between stimulus and inflation is not a law of physics, but a matter of timing and circumstances that are genuinely hard to predict. The next time there's a crisis, and there will be a next time, the pressure to print will be enormous. The political cost of not acting will feel unbearable. And the argument that it worked before, that inflation stayed quiet, will be seductive. Maybe it will work again. Maybe the money will sit still and velocity will stay low and the dam will hold. Or maybe the conditions will be just slightly different. Maybe supply will be a little more constrained. Maybe people will be a little less inclined to save. Maybe confidence in the currency will have shifted just enough that the money moves faster this time. The mechanism is understood. The timing is not. And that gap between understanding a system and being able to predict it is where financial crises are born.